Okay, welcome to everyone listening today. My name is Riddhi Nanda Kumar, and today I'm here with Dr. Basso. And I think that we can start the presentation, the interview, sort of with like a short introduction of yourself, your career and educational journey, and just, a little bit about what you do.
Mhm. Okay. Would you like me to show any slides or you just want me to talk? Which is best for
Yeah, if you
you?
have anything prepared, you can definitely show that as well. Yeah.
Okay, I can do that. So I will get that ready. And let me get this ready. Show present view. And I will share my screen. Okay, so I hope that you can see that. If
Mm-hmm.
so, already I'll look out for a thumbs up from you. So I just want to first thank you very much for asking me to talk to talk to you about my trajectory and things like that. So first, thank you. And I will say that I am from the Twin Island Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and I actually did my undergrad at the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. I went back home and I worked for a little bit, and I came to the US for my master's, where I did an master's in environmental science and policy, where I focused on environmental chemistry type project. I then worked in the marine microbiology lab, and then I did my PhD at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And I did two lab rotations, one in the lab of Alison Buchan and the other with Sarah Liebes. And ultimately, I stayed in the microbial interactions group. But
Mm-hmm.
right now, I started as a postdoc afterwards at the Joint Genome Institute here at Berkeley National Lab. And since then, I have actually gotten an award where I am now a research scientist at the lab. So that's very exciting.
Okay.
And I can now I've just hired a senior research associate and a postdoc as well. So that is that's a little bit about my trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that growing up in the Caribbean, I was this I grew up on an island, and I was once this like really tiny person here. And so when I was super young, like around 3 to 5, I was asked, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, well, I wanted to be a nurse because I wanted to help people. And
Mm-hmm.
then I quickly realized that needles and I are not friends. And so I I decided, no, nurse is not it, but I still wanted to help people. And so what I discovered is that I really loved math. And actually in like the 6th grade equivalent, I had this amazing math teacher that like really made me fall in love with math a whole lot. And I was also influenced with my dad actually, who loved math as well. And I also really loved biology and geography. So I pursued these as I wanted to go towards undergraduate degree. And
Mm-hmm.
at the time, I wish that I knew about microbiology as a field in itself. But at the time, environmental science really was the focus. And that's how I kind of ended up focusing on environmental sciences or um, environmental biology, that sort of thing. So I'll probably stop there and we can keep chatting.
Okay. I think my first question to you is sort of about what a postdoctoral fellow is, because I think I'm exposed to like the PhD degree and everything, but I'd never heard about like postdoctoral fellows, and I was just wondering, like, so you get your degree but you're still considered a fellow, so how does that work? How long does it take for you to become a research scientist like you are now? And then like how is it different than being fully like a research scientist?
Mhm, mhm. So to answer the first question, what is a postdoc? So a postdoctoral researcher, essentially your terminal degree in terms of
Mhm.
like official classes and degrees that you can get, the highest you can attain is a PhD. Now,
Mhm.
a postdoctoral researcher is essentially a training period where you have even more independence in what you can research. And in that point, you can learn something new in a different group. So for example, for me, my PhD research, I was looking at the interactions between viruses and bacteria in the marine environment. And I
Mm-hmm.
studied that with specific tools for 5.5 years. And for my
Mm-hmm.
postdoctoral training process, essentially, what I wanted to do was learn more about bioinformatics or computational type research and or molecular biology type techniques.
Mm-hmm.
So my end goal, well, first of all, I thought that what I wanted to do was get an undergrad, get a master's, and I would have my own consultancy firm looking at water quality analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, life doesn't always go according to plan. So that's not what happened. But essentially, I did do a lot of things with marine work. I think because I always loved water.
Mm-hmm.
But I finished my PhD. Like I decided I wanted a PhD. I did that. And then I decided that I wanted to be a principal investigator or PI or faculty. So at the time, I didn't really know too much about national labs. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually happy that I can talk to students about what it is like to be in a national lab.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but essentially, I had one professor who was on my PhD committee who had come to the Joint Genome Institute, their annual meetings for the past 10 years. And she said, oh, it's great. You're going to love it. There are great people there doing really amazing science. It'll be a good experience. And so as I started at the postdoctoral research level at the lab, I then came to realize that I would like to be either a principal investigator in a national lab or in a strictly academic setting, because I want to be able to, one, identify um, new ideas in biological fields,
Mm-hmm.
particularly with microbiology, but I also want to mentor students. And so at the lab, I have the opportunity to do outreach, to do in terms of, like, for example, the Book Lab Director's Apprenticeship Program or other
Mm-hmm.
programs that we have K through 12.
Mm-hmm.
But the Joint Genome Institute, we also have an internship program with UC Merced, for example. So over the past couple of years, I have had an intern from UC Merced so that they are able to get privy to the training and resources that we have on site as well. So there are some people that do a postdoctoral position just so that they can maybe position themselves not to be in an academic setting, but perhaps to transition into an industry job, for example. But more so because I had expressed interest in becoming, a group lead essentially.
Mm-hmm.
I was told that this additional training would be beneficial for me. And then I think one of the questions you had was how fast can you transition from a postdoc to a research
Right.
scientist? So
Mm-hmm.
this also depends on your group, and it also depends on your personal drive. So
Mm-hmm.
there are some people that would start in a position, and you can, if your progress is really good, you can get those positions of promotion. But for myself, wanted to really um I wanted to apply for a grant, and I didn't get it the first time, so
Mm-hmm.
failure is part of this. But I was encouraged to reapply, which I did, and I did get that award. And
Oh,
so
congrats.
so with the award, it came the additional responsibility, but then also it is exciting, right? It's like I had this idea, and the lab is invested in this idea and in me. And
Mm-hmm.
so for the next couple of years, I am being allowed to pursue this particular goal, which is really cool, I think.
Okay. I think my next sort of question to you. So you mentioned previously that you were initially interested in like environmental biology, health and safety, sort of, and then you sort of became interested in microbiology. So I wanted to ask you about what specifically made you gravitate towards the field, and what experience you had that sort of made you interested in this field, and just thinking about like how you particularly decided that you wanted to go into research. Was there any
Mm-hmm.
experience that you had along the way that made you aware that research is what you wanted to do in the future at all?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
And you also, sorry, you mentioned that like getting a PhD was also not something you initially intended to do. So all of that, like what drove you to sort of go for the PhD, become a researcher, and pursue like the field of microbiology is what my question is.
yeah, no, that's a great question actually. So during my undergraduate degree, I did a double major in environmental biology,
Mm-hmm.
and I did this away from home. So I left Trinidad and I went to Jamaica, and that was a 3 year undergrad. And for that particular program, we had a lot of field work and we had a lot of labs. So we had oceanography classes, ecology, forestry, freshwater ecology. So we had a lot of field work going around the island, actually collecting samples, doing labs in on campus itself too.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the labs that I took part in was this for this oceanography class. And essentially the goal of the class was to identify if a particular invasive species of bivalve, so um, for example, like oysters or mussels,
Mm-hmm.
there's a particular species that is not native to Jamaica, and it comes in the plankton in a lot of ships that come into Kingston Harbor. So the goal of the class is to identify if we see any in the mangroves, if we see any after the dredging. They did some dredging in the harbor. So that entailed going out, like walking in like mangroves, diving, snorkeling, these sorts of things, and also like bringing back samples. So I had this idea from that, actually spearheaded an interest in what I wanted to do for my master's, because I wanted to do something like that in the Tampa Bay area where I was in Florida. And so I came across several challenges as to why this was not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially what I did is that I took that challenge and I spun it a bit so that I still got to work with the mussels and oysters that I wanted to. But my master's in environmental science and policy program, but I
Mm-hmm.
focused on the science because that was more interesting to me,
Mm-hmm.
although like I had to cover policy things as well. But essentially like the process of collecting the samples, analyzing the samples, and then reporting it, I thought it was very useful, particularly because for that project, the end goal was for me to be able to tell people who eat oysters and mussels in a buffet, for example. You would see this on a common buffet, whether or not these bivalves were good to eat or not. So there was an end goal to the project itself, to the research project itself. And so after that was done, I don't know if you remember, I think other people might also remember this, but
Mm-hmm.
there was a an oil spill that
Oil
happened in the
spill.
Gulf of
Yeah, I remember
Mexico
you
some
talking about
years ago.
this when we met. Mm-hmm.
Right, right.
I
So
think your research was about how like you could use microbes to sort of clean up the spill, I believe. Is that?
in essence, I was using microbes, so bacteria and viruses, to help
Mm-hmm.
monitor the health of the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay.
And so I was the one person. So actually, before I started, I was helping as a teacher's assistant for an upper level microbiology course. So sometimes in grad school, you would have to teach a class, or
Mm-hmm.
you'd be asked to teach a class. And so I tended to teach the upper level microbiology labs. So I
Mm-hmm.
would grade, well, for some of the classes, I would make the exams, grade the exams, do the lectures, these sorts of things. So you're already getting that teaching experience. And from that experience, actually, one person who was in the lab, she got a job, I think, at Harvard, maybe, or she left essentially, and they needed someone to fill that spot. And the person who was the head of the lab reached out to me and said, I have seen you work independently for so long in my lab. We
Mm-hmm.
need somebody to fill this position. Are you able and willing to do this? Are you available? And I said yes. And through that person seeing me work independently, they had faith in me doing this job as well. And the person who I was directly reporting to was that person's postdoc. So it was an interesting kind of how everything kind of tied together. But based on that particular research experience, while I was there, I did that for about 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was there, the group lead for that lab was hosting an aquatic virus workshop. And it's through that workshop, even though we were just a host lab, so all I
Mm-hmm.
really had to do was show up to help with the audiovisual, help people around St. Petersburg, Florida, help in general things. But I decided that I wanted to listen to what research people were doing, and I really loved it. I loved the energy of the people at the conference. I love what people were doing, and I just, I got to talk with some people, and I kept in contact with some people. And one person from Ghana, he ended up being like my academic sibling in PhD.
Mm-hmm.
He suggested, if I have no geographical restriction, I should apply. So I applied, and I also got a scholarship to go, and I that's how I decided to do my PhD there.
Okay.
And so, but yes, you're absolutely right. I had no intention of doing a PhD whatsoever. So it
So,
just like being surrounded by people that were doing really, really cool science,
mm-hmm.
it helped solidify for me that this is what I wanted to do.
Okay. My next question is, so you complete your PhD, you're encouraged to apply to the Joint Genome Institute, but then how did you sort of, so is this only based in California? Sort of, it's a part of the Department of Energy, I understand, but I'm not completely sure because we were at the building we were at was called the Integrated Genomics Building, but then the JGI was sort of like a part of it, but I'm not sure. Is it only in the Berkeley lab? And like, what was the reason for you to sort of move from like Florida, I guess, to the West Coast and sort of decide that like you wanted to pursue this here?
Yeah. So I guess I would have moved from masters in Florida to PhD in Tennessee, and then
Oh,
now, and then
okay. Yeah,
several
okay.
steps. It's several steps, but you're right.
Mhm.
um
It's still
yeah,
like,
so yeah,
yeah,
I am
just
I am
still moving, like quite a big change. Yeah.
I'm leapfrogging north and west as we go. Is
Mm-hmm.
the running joke. Yeah, so you're right. The building itself is the integrated genomics building, and it houses different parts, of which the Joint Genome Institute is a part. And
Mm-hmm.
so the Joint Genome Institute actually is in a very interesting position, in that we have research projects, which I'm part of the research project component,
Mm-hmm.
but we have user facilities. Well, we are a user facility, meaning that people can use the resources of the Joint Genome Institute, while not having to own those resources to do the preparation of their samples.
Mm-hmm.
But then they use our platform as well for looking at their data. And it's not really like grants, but we have that
Application.
relationship between people from all over the world using the
Okay.
facility, and then they get their data back essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the Joint Genome Institute in this very interesting position. And the Joint Genome Institute, the knowledge base, these parts that are part of the IGB, or Integrated Genomics Building, are part of the biosciences division that is part of Berkeley National Lab,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like in parts of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, as a whole, actually, um, there are lots of national labs all across the country. So perhaps if I knew I wanted to work in a national lab, there's Oak Ridge National Lab that's located in Knoxville, Tennessee. Well, Oak Ridge, I should say, Tennessee. Um, and I know that there are some people who are working there, and there are people who work at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and they might work with people at Oak Ridge National Lab, perhaps Argonne, I think Pacific Northwest, you have several national labs all across
Okay.
the country. So it depends on what your research is like, what your collaborations look like. For me, I just thought that the plant microbe interactions group
Okay.
at the JGI with the goal of learning more bioinformatics based things, because there are lots of, probably half the JGI are people who are data scientists. Um, with the goal of learning more about that, I was very strategic with where I was going to choose, in part with what I would be able to learn while at that time, or in
Okay.
that place. Mm-hmm.
So if I'm understanding correctly, it's just because different labs focus on different like parts of science. And microbiology was just like very strong at the Berkeley lab. And you decided that like it also had other opportunities that you could sort of learn from if you were postdoctoral. So
Mm-hmm.
okay, I got it now.
Yeah.
So you did your master's and then PhD, and then you came to the Berkeley lab.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot to follow, I think, because in my mind, there's undergrad, and then everything else is like really far away. So just so many
Yeah.
degrees, and it's very interesting, I think, to sort of find like what you want to do. You know,
Yeah.
everyone's path is so different. Like it's always interesting to learn about.
Yeah.
So if I make
And
any more mistakes, let me know.
yeah. And I mean, like, it's also interesting too, like sometimes you might talk to faculty members and they themselves would say, oh, I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up, so
Mhm.
things change as well, like over time. But it's interesting, everybody's path is different, because there are some people who are good friends of mine, they went straight from undergrad to PhD.
Mhm.
They knew that's what they wanted to do, and that's fine. For me as well, working between points also allowed me to save some money in between time. And then as well, because I did not originally want to do a PhD, especially in the Caribbean, I feel like we did undergrad, masters, PhD in that order.
Mhm.
So I didn't really, I knew that there was an MPhil position, like you can do an MPhil if you wanted. That's not in US system.
My mom has an MPhil degree. It's like,
Okay.
yeah, I sort of understand. It's like 2 years and then not quite a PhD, but sort of like.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Right. But then like if you wanted to, you can continue more and then like get the PhD, but
Mhm.
it's kind of like in that step.
It's really interesting to me, like genetics and everything. It's just something I grew up hearing about too, because my mom she majored sort of in botany, and then her MPhil degree was sort of about cytogenetics and everything. Um, and she would take like cuttings of onion root tip cells and everything, and right as they're dividing, she would see like the cell cycle and the divisions and everything. And just recently, I got to see her like thesis papers and everything. So she went to some like facility to use like an electron microscope, take like really detailed pictures. So I was just very impressed. And it was really cool because I don't see that like aspect of my mom all the time. It's just because I think of, um, so it was really cool to kind of learn about all of this. So I've always had
Mhm,
an interest for biology, and I'm not quite sure what exactly I want to major in, what I want to do, but
mhm,
it's like super great to hear about like different experiences.
mhm.
Um, I think my next question is sort of, yeah, like what your typical day is sort of like. Um, and then how you mentor students, because you talked to us. I felt like I could approach you because you were there like at the very first day, and you volunteered to like have us shadow you. The very last day while we were graduating, you sort of allowed it, like you were there to support us. So I felt like, I feel like you do a lot of mentoring. Just I was also looking at your LinkedIn to sort of prepare. um and I saw that you do like, you were giving, there was like an image of you giving a speech, and then there's a lot of mentoring that you do. So I was just, what does a typical day look like? Is a typical day like, is your work even like stable, the same every single day? And just what do you do to sort of mentor and then improve yourself personally, and just grow professionally?
Yeah. No, this is great. And actually it's very heartwarming for me to hear you say this, that, I wanted to be there for you, even though like the Sage Camp was just a week, but still to
Mhm.
show, you can ask me anything, and I'm happy that that was conveyed, that that I was approachable. So this is really it's really good to hear. So my regular day may change a bit.
Mhm,
So in general, there are meetings kind of scattered in between. My days are going to change a bit because I'm now going to be more of a supervisor than just managing myself.
mhm,
So I still do a lot of bench work, meaning that I do some computer stuff, but I also go into the lab. I have my bench space. I have pipettes and other things that I have to put on, safety goggles and a lab coat and everything.
mhm,
And depending on what I need to do, I will need to use specific types of equipment. So if I'm using any bacterial, I need to use a biological safety cabinet. So I would need to go on and communicate with other people who may be working with the same equipment. So I
mhm.
need to log in my time with a calendar and make sure everybody knows, okay, Jonelle is going to use the biological safety cabinet from 10 to 12 on Monday. A lot of the times in the beginning of the week, I'll start growing up my bacterial cultures so I can use them later on in the week. Um, Sometimes I will make alga plates, so give the bacteria some food to grow on for the week or so. Or if it's not a solid media, we call it media, but basically that food, right?
Mhm,
If I don't have a solid form, I might have a liquid form. And then it just depends on how the experiment goes, will determine what I do next. So for example, if I set up something on Monday, it works on Tuesday, it doesn't work on Wednesday, that's it.
mhm,
If I start on Monday and something goes wrong on Tuesday, I have to again think it through.
mhm,
If I start on Monday and everything goes well for the rest of the week, sometimes that means that I'll have some longer hours doing things in the lab. Otherwise, I may have some shorter days as well. So if I'm just starting bacteria up, that's pretty quick. If I'm actually doing serial dilutions in like something called a 96 well plate, meaning there are 96 wells in this plate.
mhm,
Um, for example, yesterday I put in 3 hours, 3.5 hours in the biological safety cabinet to do this sort of dilution series and do 2 different bacterial strains, for example.
mhm,
That took me about 3 hours. And then I put it basically, I guess it's kind of robotic, right? So I
mhm.
put it in a plate reader that would tell me what the optical density is of each bacterium. And I have, well, bacterium, but bacterial culture, I should say, in 7 replicates in 4 different conditions in 2 different bacterial types.
Okay.
Because I did a previous experiment which
Mhm,
gave some interesting results. And so to
mhm,
probe it further, I basically did set up another experiment. So I set it up yesterday and I'll get the results of that on Friday. And then I can analyze the data, put it in like a PowerPoint or so and share it with my collaborators. So every 2 weeks I have group meeting with my boss essentially
mhm,
and the other people in my group. And then my senior research associate has started. His first day was at the beginning of the year. So my days now also entail making sure that he knows where things are. We also have meetings, so I know what his progress looks like.
mhm,
And then when my postdoc starts in March, I will also have meetings with her and other collaborators.
mhm,
So so Fridays tend to be kind of okay in terms of it's not so busy.
mhm.
Usually Wednesdays and Thursdays are full of meetings or doing things in the lab. Um, and then Mondays tend to be not so bad as well, but I can also have a lot of meetings then too.
So a lot of the lab work that you do tends to be like individual, but how you do interact with people is through these meetings, is how.
Well, sometimes, so some people they come on site, some people
Mhm,
are in the lab. So if you work, so for example, my senior research associate is his bench space is right next to mine.
mhm,
And so sometimes we can communicate, for example, with GChat. So if
mhm,
there's a question that pops up or that needs immediate response, or if it doesn't need immediate response, I'll get an email and I can reply to that. But if he's right there, he can turn to me and ask, do we have this particular compound on site? Do I need to order it?
Mhm.
Um, and so, for example, with that, if I need to be able to communicate what needs to be done. So then he could set his day. Um, but then as well, I have my own research that I'm doing. So beginning of the week, I kind of set a plan, and then I continue with the plan for the rest of the week. And then because I am basically working with two different things, I'm working with bacteria and plants. So
Mhm.
if I'm doing a plant experiment, I need to think 2 weeks ahead of what I need, because I need them to grow up for 7 days in one condition and then transfer them to another condition, and then I can
Mhm.
do experiments. So it takes a lot of planning and thinking
And then
about.
you also like, so how do you keep track of all the data that you're sort of getting and everything? What do you
Mhm.
sort of?
So a lot of times, like I have a lab notebook, so I'll keep
Mhm.
my lab notes in there. There's something called Benchling that you can do lab notes online as well, and you can share with your collaborators, or you can have a like a Google Drive essentially, and you'll make a folder and you can share that and collaborate with others that way.
So is it common to collaborate on projects, or is that?
Yeah, definitely. Because especially the JGI, and I think the lab as well as a whole really tries to pride itself in doing a lot of team science, and
Mhm.
I can say for JGI we do a lot of that. And so, for example, the grant that I wrote that I was awarded, I have 6 collaborators.
Mhm.
So one, for example, you were talking about the electron microscopy. One
Mhm.
collaborator is only doing transmission electron microscopy for me and for my samples. 3 of the collaborators, there's a viral component to what
Mhm.
I'm doing. And so 3 of those collaborators are viral ecology specialists. Some are only computational, and
Mhm.
some do lab work. So it's interesting to have that. And then the other 2 are specialists in plant microbe interactions.
Okay.
And
Actually,
then
a couple of.
mhm.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, so I have to kind of answer your question about mentorship. So I have the opportunity to mentor my postdoc,
Mhm.
my senior research associate, but then during the summer, I also would mentor an intern for 8 weeks. So again,
Mhm.
I'll propose a project and I'll also help the person along, and we'll have like daily check-ins, maybe like 15 minutes or so. Um, and I'll help them prepare for their final presentation, their midterm presentation. Um, and as well, during the year through the K through 12 program, I will also do things with, high schoolers like yourself or other people through the K through 12 period.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think while you were speaking, a couple of questions popped up. One I sort of, they're kind of unrelated, so I'm not sure how to go about this. But I think one I sort of wanted to ask you about how, so now you work more with plants too, is sort of what I'm getting. So how did your work sort of change and shift to this position? And then my second question is just basically, I'm just curious about how the process works when you like apply for a grant, and you're like, I want to research this, and you petition and like you get a grant. So I was just wondering how that process worked, and it's just out of curiosity.
Mhm, mhm. So there's some things that are almost like transferable skills.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are working in a microbiology, in the field of microbiology, it can be in terrestrial or marine environments, but
Mm-hmm.
what you've learned in one study can be transferred to another. You
Okay.
learn different things, different skills, but some of the techniques are going to be the same. So for example, for the sage camp, I brought the agar plates,
Mm-hmm.
and you're able to strict isolation for individual colonies on the plate.
Mm-hmm.
That basic microbiology skill is transferable whether or not you are doing marine work or terrestrial work. The difference will be the different bacteria that you'll be using and some of the different techniques.
Mm-hmm.
So other things such as note taking, communicating with others, these things are transferable skills that I think are good to develop from a younger age. So when you get to undergraduate level, I mean, you probably have to do it already in high school level, but there's certain courses that you have to stand in front of your class and show and explain what you've done.
Mhm.
You may be graded fit, you may not be graded fit, but it's a good skill to have, being able to communicate with others, not just at a technical level, but in a broad audience as well. Um, so so that's like transferring essentially from one system to another, and
Um,
then you're
just
never gonna know everything. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say you're never gonna know everything, and so you would be the specialist in that particular thing.
Mhm.
However, that's where you kind of draw the strengths from others, from collaborators and others who know more. And so the idea is that you all help to get to the same goal, to answer the same questions. Yeah.
And just a follow-up question. So you're working with plants, and then I was
Mhm,
kind of just wondering like what the end goal of your sort of project was. So
mhm, mhm.
you're growing bacteria, like micro microbes, and then plants, but I'm not sure exactly what like the frog
Yeah,
like project is about. So if you could
yeah,
sort
yeah,
of
yeah.
go into. Mhm.
Mhm. So, for example, all of us, we have microbes in us and on us,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so this is called your microbiome.
Mhm.
So this is comprised of different types of bacteria and viruses and other microbes. Okay. So just as we have a microbiome, plants have a microbiome. And
Mhm.
sometimes this microbiome help the plants or they might hinder them. So my research is looking specifically at how a particular model plant, so very small one that a lot of people have done a lot of research on,
Mhm.
called Arabidopsis thaliana.
Mhm.
It's really tiny. So what I'm doing is I'm using a model plant and a model plant growth promoting bacterium. So it's a bacterium that helps the plant. And so
Mhm.
what I'm trying to do is figure out how their interactions, the mechanisms of their interactions. And so if I use a model plant, a model bacterium, I can then work on other plants later on that may
Mhm.
be of benefit for an agricultural or biofuel importance, for example. So the research that I was awarded, I'm looking, so I for my PhD work, I looked at how viruses interact with bacteria in the marine environment.
Mhm.
And so what has not been done um in the terrestrial realm is really look at how viruses interact with bacteria and interact with their plant hosts.
Okay.
So I'm looking at this three-part
Complex.
relationship
Mhm.
to see how the viruses help the bacterium to help the plant.
Okay. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah. So that's it in in broad terms. But
Mhm.
also, I think you had another question, which really with respect to like the grant, what
Brands.
you
Mhm.
should always do, no matter if it's a grant or some sort of award that you're applying to, look at what the requirements are. Look at what is being funded that particular year, for example,
Mhm.
and see how best you fit. Look at the wording that they use and be able to tailor your particular application so it's most appealing to those people.
Mhm.
And you must be able to, as best as you can, um, try to answer, well, why would I fund this project, right?
Mhm.
Or why should this project be funded?
Mhm.
So some excitement about the project itself should come through on the paper as best as you can.
Mhm.
So yeah, definitely following the call for what is required will help your chance. Because a lot of the times these things are very competitive. So you want to make yourself stand out as best as you can.
Okay.
Mhm.
Sorry about like the ringer in the middle, but my
No,
next question
no, no.
to you was sort of what is rewarding about your job, I think, in a day-to-day basis, and what is sort of challenging in this field, and maybe like how would you overcome that challenge?
Mhm, mhm. So I think that one of the rewards for me is being able to do the research that I would like to do.
Mhm.
And being also um I'm being invested in, which is a nice feeling. To be able to get the award to do the research that I think is also in line with the interests of the lab, but
Mhm.
also in line with my interests as well. I also like that I have the time for, as I mentioned, like for mentorship and to be mentored. So I have an official mentor in the
Mhm.
biosciences division. And so this has been very helpful to me. As well as I do appreciate having outreach opportunities and
Mhm.
resources, and to do that, to do some research that's kind of ahead of cutting edge research, as they would say, or kind of like ahead of the curve. So I can work on some new things, but then I
Mhm.
could also mentor other people to do some of those new things. And so they can take it back to the institution and they have a different perspective in that way too. Um, and then like as I said, like in mentoring others, I'll have like interns of all different varieties. And actually for them to have the aha moment and get excited about that research is also a very rewarding feeling for me. And then in terms of challenges, biology is definitely the baby of the sciences. So there's certain things in physics and chemistry, it's understood, known for a very long time. In biology, there are lots of things that we still don't know. And
Mhm.
so because lots still has to be known, there's lots to discover. And it also means that there's lots of time to fail.
Mhm.
And so with with each failure, you discover what works and what doesn't, and then
Mhm.
you get closer to the answer as well. And then so yeah, I would say like that's like the big challenges of it.
Okay. And just last question for you. I wanted to ask you about what advice you would give to high school students who are sort of thinking about research in general, or maybe they're interested in microbiology like specifically. Just what what advice would you give to them or yourself when you were in high school, if you can look back to that? What would
Mhm.
you say?
So I would point out three things.
Mm.
The first one would be to be kind to yourself. And so the higher up, at least like I have found, the higher up you climb, the more high achieving people you'll be around. And so, as I said, like you will not know everything, and success will look different on a day, on every day, and from day to day. And
Mhm.
so, in days where you think that you've actually hit a wall, be mindful, take care of yourself, take a break. Those breaks are
Mhm.
very important, and then start again. Also, it's very good to keep a good support system who may or may not be your family. And so please try not to resent your family members if they can't help you, because they might not actually know how. Sometimes your friends as well, they might not know how.
Mhm.
People that may be in your lab or doing the same thing as you along your journey, they might know. But you find your support system and you use the strength of that support system. Because actually one of the things I was told when I was doing the PhD is that you cannot do this alone. So strengthen numbers is good. So two, ask questions. So for me growing up, I was extremely shy. I was really bad, and my dad actually enrolled me in oratory classes
Mhm.
um to try to overcome this. And actually now at the lab we have Toastmasters, which is an international group essentially to help with public speaking. So I'm a part of it because I think there's always room for improvement. And so, as a very young one, I would sit very quietly. I'd be very afraid to speak up. And I was often thinking that I was the only one who did not know the answer to a question. But surprisingly, 9 out of 10 times, no one else in the room knows either. And they might also be afraid to ask. So I think that it will be very rewarding for those coming up, if you did speak up, right? If you did ask those questions. And then three, I would say to remember those who helped you along the way. So you don't need to do this, but I keep in contact with people with with people who have either written me a letter of recommendation or have significantly supported me in my development in some way.
Mhm.
So, like usually if you have good rapport with someone, even if it is you send them an email out to the blue saying, I need a letter of recommendation. Can you help me? Oftentimes they would say yes. But it's nice, perhaps like send an email maybe once a year and just briefly say how things are going on your progress. And who knows, if an opportunity may come up that where you might be a good fit, you'll be at the forefront of that person's thinking and they can forward you opportunities as they come by. Or if you have a question or something comes up in your correspondence, they may be able to help you in ways that you would not be able to anticipate at the time. So those are my words of advice to anybody up and coming.
Okay, yeah. I just again want to thank you so much for like your time, um and your support, because like you're spending I think the alarm rang because I was trying to keep track of how much time I was talking with you, but you spend so much of your time sort of helping me out. I just want to thank you for your commitment. I don't know what I'm saying anymore because we've gotten to the end. But yeah, thank you again. If
It's it's my pleasure and my honor, really. So I'm very grateful that you reached out. So thank you so much again for
Mhm.
your time,
I just
for
felt
your
like just in general, like the Berkeley lab was a very like supportive space. Just everyone, the way like the departments were, everyone, the way everyone seemed to be so passionate about what they were doing. They all came from very different backgrounds, but then they all got together so well. And just I had a great time there, and yeah, I just want to thank you for your time.
you're most welcome. And hopefully we see you at the lab in the future too,
Of course.
beyond the K through 12 programs. Yeah, it'll
Mhm.
be really exciting to have you part of the
I
lab
would love to
community.
be back too. Yeah.
And then, so you know a little bit about the K through 12 programs, and
Mhm.
perhaps I don't know if Elisa, if you wanted to add anything else for the K through 12 programs that are being offered at the Berkeley Lab itself.
Yeah, sure. First, I want to apologize. I forgot to turn on the lights in my house, so I'm like talking in the dark, but and I look like a
It's
ghost.
okay.
Um, yeah, I think Riddhi already you gave like an amazing interview. Your questions are really well thought out, and so I just want to commend you on that. And then of
Thank
course,
you.
Dr. Basso, Jonelle, like your answers, like Riddhi said, was like very supportive and really well thought out. So I don't know, it was really nice to hear this interview for me. So I just want to say that. I can just give a quick overview of K-12 programs. But like we want high school students to realize that there are opportunities at national labs, kind of like how Jonelle said, like
Mhm.
me myself also like didn't realize like there are tons of opportunities in STEM or STEM adjacent careers at the national labs. So our K-12 programs at Berkeley Lab in particular, we're really trying to bring students to not, like our young students to get excited about STEM and like start to think about careers, but for high school students, especially like to really start to immerse themselves, come to the lab, meet scientists like Dr. Basso directly, ask them questions, go to lab spaces and see it. And then, we have programs that like ramp up, starting with like SAGE or SEA, which are more exploratory camp programs where you get to explore different spaces, to our director's apprenticeship program, which is pre-internship, paid 5.5 weeks over the summer, where you start to, focus more on STEM projects, data science, coding, and finally our internship program, 6 weeks in the summer, also paid, experience with research, where you just directly work with a mentor, someone like Dr. Basso, on an independent project. So we're really hoping through K-12 programs, you do see there are opportunities in STEM and also national labs. So check out our website. That's probably the best place to go. But yeah, that's it for me.
Thank
I'm
you.
again, sorry that I'm just a floating head in the dark, but
No, it was perfect. Thank you so much, Lisa. Yeah.
Cool. All right.
No.
Well, I will make sure this recording gets sent to you, Riddhi. And thank you, Jonelle, for your time too. Really appreciate it.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah. And if there are any follow-up questions, Riddhi, please feel free to let me know. Reach out whenever you'd like.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, just both of you, because I know I'm not sure, like, this is probably past your work hours. Just taking this time to sort of talk to me is like really, really helpful, because it helps me sort of think about what I want to do, and anyone who's interested sort of get a better idea about like the opportunities that they have. Because again, I did not know much about the national laboratories nearby, or like the programs offered there and all the work that was happening there. And just, it was a great experience to be able to like meet all these people who are just so like intellectually like driven, and just so supportive. Yeah, so I had a great experience. So if anyone's interested, they should definitely apply and give it some thought. And yeah, I hope that this interview was sort of helpful to everyone who's listening.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.